Hey, deserving listeners, as many of you know, as I often will rant about, mainstream American culture, and maybe even particularly here in the Pacific Northwest, we have a culture where it denies human touch, which is a needed thing for us to feel at balance, for us to feel attuned to, for us to feel attached, for us to feel normalized, for us to feel okay. And some people will go for months without ever touching a single human being, except for like incidental touching, maybe like bumping into someone on the bus or maybe a handshake here and there. And even those people who I would consider to be quite touchy probably maybe hug someone once a day, which I think is not natural. If we look to our primate cousins, they're all over each other all the time because they don't have society telling them that touching is gross or creepy or dependent or childish or something, or you're going to catch a disease or whatever it is that prevents us all from getting us what we need. And so there are movements afoot in our society to try to change this, one of which is what I'm just going to call the cuddling movement, if you will. I first started to hear about this in the 90s, maybe the aughts. These organizations that people would get together, either like a support group, like a peer support group, where they're like, hey, we need human touch and we're going to cuddle. And it's not sexual, and if there's nothing sexual about it, it's just human touch, and it's, voluntary and consensual, and there's rules around it, and, all the personalities are there trying to, and then there were like professional cuddlers that started to come out, people who you go into their yurt and you get under a blanket and you cuddle. And when I heard about this, of course, my first knee-jerk reaction was like, well, that's kind of odd, or is this prostitution, or is this an orgy, or what is this? But then I very quickly realized that, no, this is a needed response to our sick society. And so I have a special guest on the podcast today, Erez. He is a professional cuddler or an organizational cuddler sort of dude. And so I thought we would get his experiences. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Kirk. How are you doing?
Good. So what got you started in this?
I've always been an avid cuddler. I don't think it started when I was very young, but I also realized the importance of touch a little later in life when I was serving in the military. There was a situation, if you'd like to hear about it, where my platoon and I were going into a very risky mission, and our commander said, guys, hold hands. And of course, we were a bunch of manly men, all tough and hardened, and we're like, this sounds odd, holding hands, what are we, babies? But he insisted, of course, and we had to follow the command. And once we held hands, we realized this actually works. Immediately, it relieved some of the tension, it bonded us, it felt good and natural and warm, and alleviated a lot of the stress and fear that's associated with this kind of stuff. And of course, we went into the mission, we did it, and that's where I started realizing how touch is not something weird, it's not something odd, it's not sexual, it's just a normal human thing that we all need.
Yeah. That reminds me of, I grew up playing American football, and we, in the huddle, would hold each other's hands. And there were teams that did that, and there were teams that didn't do it. It wasn't like all teams held hands in the huddle, but we would. And I remember feeling that sort of camaraderie. And you have to overcome something to do that, as you realized in the military, there's like, well, wait, we're not supposed to do this. We're breaking some kind of rule here. But then once you do it, it's just like, oh, this feels good, right? So that sparked your interest. And then here in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, what do you do?
Well, I'm a regular guy, so I spend most of my life just not cuddling. I would cuddle with my partner. I was married for a significant amount of time, so I would cuddle with my wife. Later on, I had a child. I cuddled with my child. And at some point, I joined this organization called the CSPC, also known as the Center for Sex Positive Culture. And that organization has various events where people are very open-minded about anything. And the idea of cuddling in a group kind of came about, and that's what we would do. I would at events where I would go to, me, sometimes my wife at the time, friends, we would just pull out a bunch of mattresses from the back, set them up, and cuddle in a group next to each other, on top of each other, socialize, caress each other sometimes, just form a very kind of healthy relationship, and we were all in one big group. That went on for quite a while until the CSPC shut down its doors in 2016. And for a while, I was cuddleless. So at some point, it came to me as an idea to just try to relive this. So I approached an owner of another organization in the area, a place in Woodinville, and I suggested we do this again in some kind of a formal capacity. He went for it. And it became a huge success. We had dozens of people show up, as many as 120 in some of the events. And same thing, we would set up a bunch of mattresses and just cuddle in a group. That was all really terrific. It ran for about a year and a half, again, very successful, but I wanted more. So at some point I decided to just, open a club and dedicate it to this, and which is what I did back in September of 2019. The place is called Spoonz. It's located in Seattle, and it's just a space dedicated or centered around the notion of cuddling.
Where is it?
It's in downtown Seattle on the Indian International District.
Okay.
It's a nice little building that has restaurants and other businesses. All of them are pretty regular. And we have a space. It's not very large. It's kind of a little bit intimate and cozy and warm, like soft lighting, a lot of mattresses. And there we have 2 events a week, sometimes even more. Depends on what my community wants. I think that's a key word in this kind of situation, community. That's really what I'm trying to build here, a community of people who are open-minded and are interested and like to cuddle. A significant part of the people who come to Spoonz are regulars who come every week, sometimes twice a week. Of course, we have a lot of new people joining every time. And we run an event for 4, 5, 6 hours, depends on factors, where we just cuddle in groups on those mattresses.
Yeah. So, as I was saying earlier, we need more touch. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a very fundamental thing that we all need. You probably know how when a child is born, the first thing the doctors will tell a mother is cuddle your child, spend time to skin to skin. It is an important, even critical part of the human development. And sometimes, like you said, due to society, notions or rules in different places, people kind of step away from that or forget how important it is. People who have partners of different types typically do some kind of cuddling. Some don't, for different reasons. Some of them don't because their partner doesn't like to cuddle. Sometimes life gets in the way. They are too busy. They don't have that time to kind of delve into that calmness, that period of time. Some people don't have partners for different reasons. I think everybody deserves to be touched, everybody who wants to, of course. And that's one of the reasons I created Spoonz. We have the events where you can come and enjoy that healthy, beneficial touch, whether you are single, whether you're married, whether you're young or old, pretty or ugly, rich or poor. We have options for everybody, and that's what I'm trying to create there.
I have heard about other cities in the United States and around the world who also have organizations like this. Is that true?
I've heard of a few. There were some that came into existence and disappeared. Some still exist. There's also, I believe you mentioned, professional cuddlers who are typically individuals that would cuddle with a person on a session basis. So you would get them for an hour or more, up to you. So that's a little bit different, but I think any touch is good. So I'm totally supportive of those. At least one of my members is also one of those professional cuddlers, and I'm really in love with the idea, and I'm really happy that he's doing this.
Yeah. So I want to get back to something you said about the Center for Sex Positive Culture. One of our very first episodes back in 2008 was with Alina Gabosh, who was the director.
Yeah, and a dear friend of mine.
Okay. And she came on to talk about sex positive culture and also about BDSM. And it's still, and polyamory, it's still one of our most popular episodes 11 years ago. And she invited us to come to the center in Interbay. And we've talked about it on the podcast before, and me and the other co-hosts, Umberto and Lita, went there for some evening event. It was like because it's a membership thing, like you can't just walk in. You have to, Alina Gabosh had to vouch for us to get in on a temporary basis. Anyway, it was the hottest day in Seattle history, like in the middle of the summer, 2008. And it was very interesting. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of different BDSM things, dancing, talking. There were things in other rooms. There was no air conditioning. There were cages and, just various different kinds of things happening. People having sex. Now, that was just one evening event. The Center for Sex Positive Culture has a lot of different kinds of events. I didn't know they had cuddling events back in the day.
They did, yep.
That were, I'm guessing, non-sexual.
That depends on the guests of that specific event. The way I organize those cuddle things were not sexual.
Okay.
So occasionally a person might be somewhat or completely undressed, but relatively rare. And that's the same way at Spoonz. We are a open-minded a group of people who come to this to Spoonz, and a significant portion of my guests are also members of the CSPC, or at least former members. So they are open-minded, and that means at Spoonz as well they are permitted to engage in some more adult-oriented activity. Some of our events are geared specifically towards those kind of activities, although it's not a huge part of it. I could say, in the 5 months that we've been open, there have been a handful, maybe 4 or 5 incidents where people actually engaged in adult activity. They're permitted to. It's up to them, but it's not a very significant part of what we do.
I'm trying to imagine what that looks like exactly, because, as a caveat before I ask this question, I know that there are other cuddling organizations in Seattle where that's like strictly prohibited, where they're like, no, even if 2 people are consenting to any kind of sexual genital, stimulation.
Yes.
That's not what we're here to do. We want to make everyone comfortable. We don't want to have any kind of mixing of different worlds. We want to focus on cuddling, and there's another place if you want to do cuddling and sexual activity, then by all means, but let's have this beef, because a lot of people who are reticent to start it, if they hear about the possibility of sexual things happening that could ramp up an already anxious individual. But it's if you set the rules and everyone understands what's happening going into it, there's obviously nothing wrong with it. But I'm trying to imagine what that looks like. So I go to one of these cuddling events, and it's like, well, maybe sex could happen, but it's not likely. And if it does, it's consensual. And I'm just trying to imagine, how many people are there?
So our space is approximately 500 to 600 square foot, and we have 4 or 5 mattresses out in that space. So some of them are adjacent to each other, some are separate, both physically by distance. We also have one of them with a curtain around it, which is kind of designated for people who want a little more privacy to do something. When an event starts, people just kind of huddle up on those mattresses in a group, and like I said, some of them are adjacent to each other and forming a structure that's larger than a single mattress, so it's suitable for 20 people to be there at the same time. And the majority of that's exactly what it is. So people just kind of lie down on a mattress next to each other, sometimes in a spooning position, which I guess alludes to our name, Spoonz. They might figure out a way to kind of fit all on the mattress. So the idea is to create a closeness, not quite forcing, but kind of encouraging people to really be close to each other and share that connection and touch and caressing sometimes.
How many people?
In events, we have anywhere between 10 and 40. 40 is a little bit on the packed side because the space is not very large, but 30 is very comfortable, very kind of optimal for that kind of situation. The Spoonz has been growing steadily, of course, since day one. We've had about 30% growth every month. So it's been getting fairly busy, and I'm starting to add more events. For example, this week we have 3 instead of 2 to accommodate for more people. I'm not sure if it's easy to imagine. Of course, we have pictures of the space and how a cuddle pile or a cuddle puddle, how we like to call it, kind of looks like for people to imagine. But the idea is that we always have some separation going on, so people who prefer some more adult activity can take it to a secondary or another mattress where it wouldn't be in anybody's face or make them uncomfortable.
Can you hear it happening, or is it quiet?
The place is very quiet, and we have very soft, kind of relaxing music going on. If people engage in sexual activity and they make normal human noises, that could happen. But generally speaking, it's fairly quiet and relaxing and not very obtrusive. Mm-hmm. It's a guiding principle. So I mean, it hasn't happened. But if somebody comes in and starts screaming their head off, I would intervene and make sure that nobody feels uncomfortable in that kind of situation.
I just imagine, and again, obviously this isn't for everyone. Some people have traumas that would prevent them, or just personal preferences, whatever. But there's so many therapeutic healing opportunities, because there's just so much shame we have around touch, and so much shame we have about our bodies, and so much shame we have about our breath and the way we smell, and all that has to be overcome, and to have the corrective experience of people not shying away from us and inviting that in, and maybe even saying you smell good or something.
Yeah.
That's just like surface level stuff. And then the shame we have around, again, the way our body is, and touching other people, and of different kinds of people, like men touching men non-sexually, how that would evoke our brotherly or fatherly kinds of traumas around rejection and denial of touch growing up or something. And just how powerful that would be for someone who's been through, touch trauma of some sort, physical, sexual, to go into that space. And again, because it's safe and you have a power, and if something kind of goes wonky, you're there to mediate, to have this corrective experience around the touch being safe, and have that repetitive, day-to-day encounter. I just can imagine it just being a powerful experience for people. Do you hear that from people?
Yes. I get a significant amount of very positive feedback, very warm responses, and a lot of people who come again and again, even twice a week. I do take quite a few steps as part of running the place to indeed create an atmosphere and feeling of warmth and safety. One of them, of course, is the fact that I vet individually every person before they have the ability to access the space. Like the address, for example, is not publicly disclosed. People have to talk to me on the phone individually. I spend a number of time with them. Sometimes I meet them in person before they can get in, to make sure that they are safe, that there are not a risk to anybody else.
How can you tell? What would you see as a red flag?
The process is not something I can just outline in a few sentences, but because it takes a while. I look at their online profiles, both assuming it's available, of course. Sometimes they might give me references, a person to vouch for them. Sometimes one of their partners is already a member, and I know that they could vouch for somebody else. I talk to them for a period of time, so it could be 5, 10, 15 minutes. Like I said, sometimes I meet them in person to gauge who I'm talking to, and I ask them about their life. I ask them about their history, their past, if they have anything that happened that might be a concern. For example, a person mentioned to me a few weeks ago that they have a stalker, which of course would be bad news for us. So we discuss the specifics of who that person is, what the situation is, they have a restraining order, how they look like, so that I can make sure that person, if they don't show up, and if they do show up, how we handle this and make sure nothing happens. So it's an important part of the concept. And beyond that, at the space itself, I greet everybody that comes in, and I make sure that they do feel kind of right at home right there. You've probably seen this in other places. A lot of places you go to, you find yourself in the corner with your snack or your drink, not sure kind of what to do and how to fit in. That does not happen at Spoonz. People are people. They're normal, and sometimes they could feel that way. They could be shy. They could be introverted. They could be just new. Everything is normal, but I, as the owner, as the guy who runs the events, keep track of everything. I walk the floor throughout the entire night and keep an eye on people. And if I see somebody who I think needs a little bit of help in that sense, I would approach them and I would either introduce them around to people. Sometimes I might try to find them a place to cuddle with others if they can't really figure it out on their own. Sometimes I would just kind of plant myself on a mattress and go, hey, come here, cuddle with me, and form kind of like a group around me. And that kind of starts to flow and makes people all very comfy and cozy. That's why I have such a high recurrence rate, because everybody's really, really happy with how that works.
Is there an age requirement?
The age requirement is adults, so people who are above 18. I would be concerned if somebody's 18 but still in high school due to some legal aspects of this, but generally speaking, adults. And we have a very wide range of ages from, I believe the youngest I've seen was about 22 so far, and the oldest person is probably about 60.
What's the gender distribution?
It varies, so I don't control it or even try to control it. That would be a big no-no for me. But I would say it's about 50-50 on average. Some events are more attractive to guys, some more to women. We've also had events with there were a majority of women, but like I said, I don't try to control it. It's not an agenda. It's not a purpose, because again, the idea is not meant to facilitate couples cuddling or dating or hooking up.
Right.
In my opinion, and most of my guests, it's just as fun to cuddle with your own gender than another gender. We have a significant portion of people from the LGBTQ community, including people who are asexual, people who are trans, and the idea is that cuddling is, like you said, it's non-sexual. I mean, it could be in some situations, but I'm a cuddle purist myself. For me, cuddling is not sexual. It's not a gateway to sex or to making out. And for me, cuddling with any human being is as fun as women, for that matter. And I try to create that kind of atmosphere where we would enjoy a cuddle no matter who it's there.
So you said there are events that are more attractive to particular genders?
Yes.
Like what kind of events?
So some of our events are more adult-oriented or have different themes and different parties. So, for example, last week we had a comedy night where I brought in 7 comedians and they did a comedy show.
Like while people are cuddling?
No. It was not. Well, I mean, I would have liked that to be done, but of course we had to let them focus.
I mean, I feel bad for the comedian, unless they were cuddling too, I suppose. But.
Yes. Well, we had 40 people in the house at the time, so I had to kind of put out a bunch of chairs, and it was very similar to a setup of a comedy club in that sense. After the show was over, we put away the chairs, put all the mattresses, and most of the people who stayed around cuddled regularly. We have a regular monthly game night where we pull out card games and board games, anything from Stratego to from Cards Against Humanity to Monopoly. We even have our own custom, specially made set of Monopoly with that kind of centers around the sex-positive community. We have TV. We have nights where we have a TV show playing. We have, of course, more adult-oriented, so kink focused events. We have once a month we play a porn movies on a screen we have there. So different types of things based on who likes to come. And of course, once a month we have a purely platonic event where there's no adult activity permitted or nudity of any kind. So for those who really are very timid about that kind of stuff, that is once a month they can enjoy that kind of atmosphere as well.
What do you mean? So all the other events there's sexual potential, is that what you're saying?
It's allowed. It's permitted.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen a lot. Like I said, it happens once or twice a month, but it's permitted if people want to.
Are you becoming the next sex-positive culture center in Seattle?
I think it would be way above me to aspire to that level. I mean, the CSPC, first of all, it's still around. It still exists and it runs. And beyond that, I mean, it's an organization that's been around for decades. I don't presume to be.
But it sounds like that. You're at least another venue.
It's
I mean, because the events you're saying are exactly the same that would happen at sex positive culture. They would have barbecues and game nights and all that kind of stuff. And
yeah, in a lot of ways it is like that. And again, we cater to similar audiences. I just don't want to be arrogant or presumptuous about this. I've created my space. It has some differences from CSPC and other venues in the region. I offer some benefits. In some ways, I think I made it better. In some ways, it's not.
How is it
obviously, it's better, for example, in the fact that we have a very large parking garage dedicated to us with a room for 70 cars. We're also on a very main public transportation hub, so people can get there from anywhere very easily. I've made a lot of small things in the place that make it fun, like a phone charging station, so you don't run low on juice. There's special places on the walls to hold your glasses while you're cuddling, so they don't get crushed. A lot of things of that nature, but obviously the place is small. The CSPC has a very large space, can host hundreds of people, while I cannot. So there's always those differences.
You said it closed in 2016?
The CSPC closed its doors in 2016 in their original location, which was in Ballard. It was
in Inner Bay or Ballard?
It was in Ballard.
It was in Ballard?
South of Ballard, just south of the
Inner
of
Bay. Inner Bay.
I'm not familiar with the name of the area, but yes.
Yeah.
So it closed the location there in 2016, and it was without its own location for a while.
Why'd they close?
There was the owner of the building where it was decided to sell the property for redevelopment, and it became a storage storage location. The CSPC at the time had no permanent location for a while, and eventually they did. In a cooperation with an organization called Erez, they opened the location that is in downtown Seattle on Pioneer Square, which is where they operate now. There's differences. So it used to run 40 events a month, and now I believe it's 1 or 2. And like I said, many of my guests are current or former member of the CSPC, so it's shared in a lot of ways.
I mean, are a lot of your people in your community thankful that someone opened up another venue that emulates at least or continues the community?
Yes, and it's very important for me not to be, in a competition mode. There are many venues that cater to our community, and all of them are terrific. I oftentimes refer people to their activities. My website also lists and links all of them together. I think we all need options. I mean, people like my guests need options. I believe the community needs those events and venues, and I think we all gain and benefit from supporting each other and recommending each other rather than trying to win or anything like that.
Right. I mean, the whole idea is based on the benevolence of let's open our doors to the sides of most people, if not all people, that are being suppressed by society, not only in cuddling, obviously, but also sexual expression and being able to talk about things in a sex-positive manner.
Yes.
We're all traumatized by sexual shaming and by body shaming and gender shaming and whatever. And the sex-positive culture movement that's been around for a while has been trying to push back on that. We're succeeding in some ways, but it's this giant tidal wave of shame that is to some extent ever increasing in some ways, in my opinion, or at least in certain arenas. We're definitely not healthy as a society. There's just so much shame and limitation and judgment and I'm not just talking about, the religious right per se. It's everybody.
Yeah.
And so, obviously, with all that hope and benevolence in the community, you're not out to crush another organization.
The opposite.
Alina Gabosh, how does she feel about scaling back? Do you know?
I don't know how she feels about the CSPC, but of course she's still involved with them. She's doing events or involved in events that are there. She was also planning in appearing in my comedy nights to perform. Unfortunately, due to illness, she was unable to attend. But I feel a lot of positive vibes from her. Like I said, she's a dear friend to me.
Yeah.
You're right about the fact that our society does cause some challenges. I've personally observed a 9-year-old child, get disciplined for hugging another student in school when they were partying on some school day. That kind of state of mind is harmful to anybody. We shouldn't feel shame or bad about wanting to touch another person and enjoy that kind of situation.
There's a caveat to that of just like maybe the kid being hugged doesn't want to be there's a way to help kids navigate that doesn't just shut it down, right?
Absolutely.
It's just like, oh, you're hugging. That's great that you want to hug. Hug me. I want to hug, but we want to kind of make sure that people are okay with it,
Absolutely.
and sort of navigate that so that it's not a black and white kind of.
Of course, consent is always a significant factor for me personally, for Spoonz, and for anybody who should have that on their mind. In the case I'm referring to with the child, that was absolutely consensual. It was a very normal thing. That child and the other child were regular friends and used to hug, and then one day one of the teachers saw them and felt it was inappropriate for a student to touch another.
And not to fault the teacher, although we can, but it's a system, a legal system, a political system, a societal system, or potentially a religious system, I suppose, that upholds this very, very strong notion that you do not touch other people. Because if you're touching other people, that is like a hair width away from sexually abusing them, which I find to just be bizarre, And as, a man, a cisgender man myself, it's worse for our kind because it's like if I am on the bus and someone needs help or something and I reach out, I won't, because I'm like, well, I'm pretty sure at least half the people on this bus will assume I'm trying to rape someone or I'm trying to grope someone. A cisgender woman can, there will still be shame, but there's just this tremendous culture around creepiness and sexual predators, and a lot of men in my circle are frequently ranting about, like, look, there are sexual predators out there. They're a minority. They're out there, and I get the association, but it's like 0.1% or 1%. I don't know. It's a small percentage of cisgender men who would ever be capable of doing such a thing. The rest of us are not capable. We don't want to. It's not on the agenda. We don't like non-consensual acts. We don't want to impose ourselves on other people. It's actually like nails on a chalkboard to think we would, touch someone in a way that they wouldn't want to be touched. And so stop assuming that we're all rapists. I get the association. We need to do what we can for, victim advocacy and putting rapists in their place, but don't generalize to all of us for crying out loud. It's
agreed.
Horrible.
Yeah. People are concerned. People are afraid, and it's true that statistically speaking, the majority of sexual predators are men, and that's something I cannot change. But you're right; it is ultimately a small percentage, and there is. We have the ability to develop relationships and trust each other and have normal, regular interactions without assuming that everybody is a predator or a creepy just because they could or might be, or theoretically. It's just the way our society developed. Something happened to me a few months ago at work. I was at my office. I work for a technology company, and a colleague of mine, male, touched my face with his fingers, which blew me away. I was shocked that, not in a negative way, on the contrary, I was shocked that he trusts me enough to let himself touch my face without fearing that I'm going to run screaming to HR or getting fired or getting anything crazy going on. It was a kind of like a humorous thing. His fingers were wet. He wanted to wet my face to it's sort of a prank kind of thing. But again, I was just elated that he and I have such a strong and close relationship, that he trusts me this way. And of course, I trust him similarly. And I wish our society one day goes into a situation where people can and do trust each other in that fashion. And if I were to come to work and there's a colleague that's close to me or a friend, when we would hug on coming in or coming out, whatever it is, without fear that it's some kind of criminal or disgusting or horrible activity.
How do you work more touch into your regular life outside your center?
My own social circle are people who are very close to me. Many of them are guests of Spoonz. So for us, for me and all of my friends, it's very normal to touch and to hug and even cuddle sometimes, on a regular basis. There was actually...
Like where? What kind of context would you cuddle?
We might go to get coffee together and sit on a couch, and just instead of sitting across from each other, we would sit next to each other, and I might caress them, they might caress me, something like that. In fact, there was a time in between those the creation of Spoonz and the closure of the CSBC where I was missing cuddling and touch so much that I actually organized a cuddle event at IKEA. Which, it's true. I mean, it's really happened. We organized a bunch of about 15 people. We just met up at IKEA. They have this area near the cafeteria. There's a bunch of couches, and we just hung there for a few hours and talked and caught up on stuff. It was months since we've seen each other, and we did this while touching, and it was, I guess, a few people kind of thought it was weird. I guess people passerby, but we really enjoyed it. It was very nice, very fun, very normal.
The employees didn't do anything?
Nope, nothing. It went on for hours, and everybody was good with it.
So I want to take a break, and when we get back, I want to ask you about the potential legal issues. Okay?
Sure.
All right, we're back from the break. If you haven't become a patron of the podcast, do so now. Go to patreon.com, become a patron of the podcast. You get access to all of our best episodes, and you won't have to listen to ads like you just listened to. So I'm curious, you mentioned earlier that you try to avoid legal issues.
Yes.
What sort of legal issues do you avoid?
Well, of course, people who are underage may not have the legal ability to consent to some of the activity that goes on at Spoonz. Sexual activity itself and kink activity are usually restricted to people who are adults. So it's not a very clear, like, forbidden or disallowed. I mean, people who are consenting above certain ages are okay to do it, but I don't want to take any kind of risks in that situation. I want to be above reproach in that kind of sense. That's why Spoonz is also a legally registered business, just like any other.
And it's your side gig. Is it making money for you? I mean, you don't have to answer that question, but you said you work in tech, and
I do. Yes.
This is like your hobby, or
I like to think of it as my calling rather than my hobby. But yes, it is a hobby. It is a side activity for me. I work in tech, and I've invested pretty much everything I had in making Spoonz happen. So I'm obviously, businesses take time to take off. They require investment. I invested a significant amount, and I'm actually very transparent about it. Anybody who asks will hear the exact number of dollars I put in there. And I hopefully within time, I actually might break even this month, very likely. We were very close to this in January, but the snow hampered some of our plans. So I'm optimal that we'll break even. And then, with time, maybe in a year or two, I might be able to cover some of those costs. Lucky for me, because I work in tech and I make a significant amount of money, that means I can afford to kind of take a breath and not be too stressed out if I make less or even lose a certain amount of money in the process. That's lucky for me.
Does this... You mentioned that you used to be married, and I don't know,
Yes.
your current...
I am divorced, yes.
Are you in a relationship with someone right now?
Yes, I am polyamorous, which people probably guessed because the sex positivity is very much in line with polyamory. So I do have a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and I'm dating a couple of people that might eventually develop into more serious relationships. Okay. I'm very open to it.
Because I was wondering if your energy into this calling was a way of having intimacy and physical touch without the complication of having to commit or having to, find someone that's compatible with you or something. I don't know. Is this question making any sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and like I said, a lot of people who come to Spoonz are people who may find it challenging to have somebody else or somebody regular to cuddle with. Me, myself, I've not had a challenge with this. Like I said, I have a girlfriend and boyfriend that I've had for over 2 years, way before Spoonz, and I don't think I'll have much challenges in finding somebody to cuddle with, but I do like... like I said, Spoonz is my calling. Bringing cuddling to the world is my calling, and something that I want to do, hopefully one day full-time. Maybe even have other cuddle clubs, other places that will reach additional audiences, people who are too far away from Seattle or find it challenging in terms of scheduling. People need touch. It's very evident. It's very clear, and the responses I have from my guests clearly show that this is the right thing to do, that this is causing very positive impact to their lives. And I just want to bring it to as many people as I can.
So Alina Gabosh, upon meeting me in 2008 and really opening my brain to sex-positive culture and to polyamory and I guess to BDSM to some extent as well, I set my mind to, because I'm not polyamorous, but I set my mind to understand the community and understand the benefits and those who choose that lifestyle. And as time went on, because it's interesting, just a side note, when I listened back to that episode in 2008 where she's talking about polyamory, my questions are the sort of questions you'll hear from people that don't know anything about polyamory, the sort of typical knee-jerk reaction questions that people will have. They'll say like, well, how does that work? Don't you get jealous? Like, are you just cheating on your spouse? You know, these kinds of questions. And I mean, I wasn't asking those questions exactly, but it was from that kind of ignorant mindset, really. Over time, I've just investigating a lot, but really, it was Alina started to refer clients to me who were poly, and so I would start to treat not only individuals, couples, but also the polycules, as they call them, right? And so I would have 6 people on my couch, but it doesn't fit 6 people, so I'd have to get other chairs. But
sounds like a cuddle pile,
right? And so there would be a married couple, and then the wife's boyfriend, the husband's girlfriend, another degree of separation away from that.
Yeah,
because and I don't know if you've heard this joke, maybe you have. Is that swingers have a lot of sex, but polyamorous people like to talk about having sex a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
And so because part of the polyamorous creed or ethics is to discuss things beforehand so that no one is taken by surprise, everything's consensual, and that polyamorous people are also interested in kind of typically longer-term relationships. So you have to talk about it. You have to figure out, what people want, what their needs are. And I had a question here, but I'm forgetting what it was. Oh, for those people out there who aren't aware of polyamory, they might be thinking, wait, so he has a kid and now he has, this lifestyle. What's that like for his kid? Can you answer that question?
So my kid is not aware of my polyamorous lifestyle, and I do not have plans to have him involved in it or be aware of it. He doesn't live with me, so he isn't exposed to it. When I am with him, I'm only with him. I don't want to, distract the attention that I give him full from really anybody else. So that's part of that. I do know that that many people have polyamorous households. For example, my own girlfriend lives with her husband and her girlfriend in a house. In fact, it's one of the most amazing examples of how polyamory can be so beneficial because my girlfriend, comes from an economic background that doesn't give her a lot of leeway in terms of running her life, and her girlfriend is also not very financially wealthy, but so together they separately they both lived in a relatively small places, but together as a family of 8, 3 adults and 5 children, they've actually been able to afford a very, very large and very nice house in Auburn where they all live together. And not only is it a huge space for all of them with a room for every child, but having 3 adults living in the house also means they have a meal on the table every day, twice a day, and the place is clean and organized, and there's always somebody to do the laundry. And if one of them needs to go to see a doctor or go out, there's somebody to keep an eye on the kids and keep them good and healthy without external babysitters. So it's actually quite amazing, in my opinion. I'm very, very infatuated with some of the notions of polyamory. Of course, it is an imperfect way of life, just like anything else. Jealousy is a challenge for some people. Me, myself, I am incapable of feeling jealousy. I don't know what it is. I think it goes back to my childhood where I was exposed to some of these values very early on and was kind of deprogrammed from that notion. So I've never felt jealousy. I don't know what it's like. I can't even imagine it. Lucky for me. People I've seen sometimes were feeling those things. And like you said, it's something we talk about. So swingers and polyamorous people are somewhat distinct groups of people. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of people who are both. And of course, there's nothing wrong with swingers. Some of my best friends are. I've been to swinger clubs. I know a lot about them. But realistically, there is somewhat of a difference in the way things are done. People who swing usually have more interest in sex and less in relationships. A lot of them might have sex with a person without even knowing their name. Sometimes they intentionally do not want to know the person's name because they don't want a complication. On the contrast, people who are polyamorous are interested but less or so in the sexual aspect of a relationship, and the connection. The relationship is what it is. And that's the same for me. Like I said, I have a boyfriend and a girlfriend. I actually have very little to no sex with both of them, with either of them, because that's not the main focus of the connection. And that's the way I do things. Some people have more, some people have less. But again, the main focus is the spiritual connection that I have with those people. The love, the caring, the being there for each other, being supportive. For example, my boyfriend has a medical procedure I'm taking him tomorrow for, just like other people would take their wife or a girlfriend to it. It's perfectly normal, and that's the important part.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I have treated families like the one you mentioned, and at the time I was still doing in-home family therapy, and so that was pretty eye-opening as well to me. A polyamorous family with kids, and I had a lot of conversations with everyone, including the kids, and there was a teenage girl, and she would talk about how, she was like, yeah, at school I don't really talk about it because no one really understands, but I don't know, I don't understand what the big deal is. I mean, my parent, my 4 parents are just as annoying as if I had 2 parents.
Yeah. Yes.
I have 4 parents that are telling me what to do, and I don't want to do that. Yeah. And I also understand that they love me, and that's fine. Like, if you take away the construct and the shame and the judgment and the I don't know, all those negative connotations, kids are just like, yeah, whatever. It's the same transition that all of us have made in terms of like, wait, so 2 men can raise a child? Most of us have if we came from a place of ignorance or skepticism, we now understand, like, yeah, of course, and research shows that as well. Don't you need a woman's love? That research shows, no, you certainly can if you want, but there's no developmental differences when 2 gay men raise a child from birth. So it's the same when it comes to poly relationships as well. And it emulates the way it probably was and still is for probably a majority of the world, which is you have your parents and you have your uncles and your aunts and your grandparents and the friends of the family whom you call aunts and uncles, but they're not really aunts and uncles, who all participate in the child rearing of an individual.
You mentioned the religious right as maybe a part of society that may object to polyamory or some of these things. And yeah, that does happen. Although if we really think about this, polyamory goes way back. If you think about even biblical times, Jacob, the famous biblical figure, he married Leah, and then he married Rachel. So there was 2 wives, but those 2 wives also came with 2. I believe the term is, I'm not sure if it's mistress or something. I'm not sure of the English term for it, but basically 2 women who lived with them without matrimony. And those kinds of relationships were very common back in biblical times and all throughout history. Only around the 4th century after Christ was where the church kind of started pushing towards monogamy, and then it was about time it became standard. First the Christians, and a few hundred years later the Jews also started adopting that way of life, and that's been the case for many, many years, although there are still societies that practice polygamy or variations of it in several ways. Polyamory, of course, is very prevalent in America, in Canada. In my home country of Israel, it's also extremely prevalent. I believe approximately 40% of the population of Israel are either practicing it or open to it to some degree.
Really?
Yes, there have not been very academic surveys in the last few years, but several of them that have happened shows a significant growth. And I personally believe that in the Northwest, the percentage in the population is very, very large, possibly above 40%. With certain population groups, it's even higher. So the LGBTQ community is more open-minded about it, so it's higher percentage. With the younger generation, it's also more prevalent. So my educated guess, based on my knowledge of the community and people, I estimate that above 60% of the people in this region and the younger age groups are practicing polyamory in some way, or at least experimenting with it.
Whether they identify as polyamorous or not.
Exactly. Yes.
And I would guess, based on your estimation, that most wouldn't identify as polyamorous, right?
Some people would keep it a secret. I myself do not. People at my workplace and all my friends are aware of it, my family, of course, as well. But yes, there are some stigmas somewhere, and some people prefer to keep it private.
Or they don't know about polyamory, and they're just acting as polyamorous.
Some people might have a lover or something, or even do it with some kind of shame or secrecy, without knowing that it is in reality polyamory, which literally means multiple love. The polyamory concept of ethical non-monogamy means that we feel obliged to be honest, open, and ethical about it. But if a person does that unethically, they're still technically loving multiple people at the same time. I obviously would encourage anybody to be open and respectful and share that information and data and not do anything unethically or secretly. Reality sometimes is different than what I would hope for, but that's the way it is.
Right. Meaning that if you're in a committed relationship and you are starting to have strong urges to have sex with other people, or connection with other people, or you just want to make out with someone, or you just want to cuddle with someone, or whatever.
Exactly.
And that there's a way to navigate that with consent with your partner. It's not without its jealousy. It's not without its potential hurt. It's not without the potential of your partner going like, nah, I don't want you to do that. I'm a monogamous person. No, you can't do those things. There's a way to do it ethically, respectfully, lovingly, that doesn't lead to secret affairs, right?
Absolutely.
That can be very painful because it's the lies and the hurt and the deception that destroys people's trust for each other. And if you had just, started out as the urge was emerging with some conversation, all that could have been saved. Of course, our society doesn't make it any easier because there's no rom-coms about polyamory,
Well, there actually are a little bit of that going on. It's being portrayed on the media more and more in the last few years. Even the current show, there's a show that started a couple of weeks ago called Avenue 5, a science fiction comedy show, where actually they show the captain of the ship talking to two people using something like Skype, and the person on Earth says, "Oh, look, our husband is in space." And then the camera pans to show a picture of three of them together, so they are basically a polyamorous throuple, is what we call it. So it's becoming more and more prevalent in the media as well, reflecting real life. Jealousy, ultimately, you know this probably better than I do. Jealousy a lot of time comes from fear, the fear of loss. We have a person in our lives, and we're afraid that if they love somebody else, they will stop loving us. Which is something that a lot of us kind of get taught over time. People tell us, that you can have only one. If that one's like somebody else, they will leave you. But that's really the thing. Polyamory suggests that does not have to be the case. A person can love many people, and if they love you and another person, there's no reason for them to leave. If you give them a reason, sure, but there's no technical reason for it. They can exist in several ways, either living together or living apart. But there's a lot of options, and there's no need to be afraid. I have multiple partners. I am absolutely not concerned about any of them leaving me because I'm a great guy. I'm nice. I'm friendly. I'm supportive. I'm there for them in every possible way, and vice versa. So none of us have to fear that kind of situation. And when there's no fear, there's no jealousy, at least in my case.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the fear. The attachment loss is that if they're going to look at someone else, if they're attracted to someone else, if they have sex with someone else, then that is a clear indication of the beginning of the end of that connection. which is not inherently true. I will say that having treated a lot of polyamorous couples and people, that the flexibility can lead to more relationships ending. So I'm in my, that's not a bad thing. It's just a thing, I guess. But I have seen people who I would guess, if they weren't polyamorous, might still be together, because all your energies have to go into one person, so you kind of have to make it work. And there's less, or there's more stigma that I guess sort of forces people together. Now, of course, on the bad side of that, you have people who are forced in a situation they don't want to be. They start cheating and then they break up, or they cheat and not break up or something. So it's not like, that's all sort of a good forced situation. But I have seen people that I thought, because you're in a relationship, you're at the 10-year mark, things are not quite as passionate as before, and there's this philosophical question. It's just like, well, maybe it's time for the relationship to end, and starting a new chapter. But there's another philosophy, and there's no right answer to this, of just like, well, what about that long-term familiarity and love that people can have where you're together for 30, 40, 50 years?
I've known quite a few people who are polyamorous for an extended period of time that could span decades. So that does happen. Although you are right in the fact that people who are in a monogamous relationship and then decide to turn it into a polyamorous ones do oftentimes find difficulty. Sometimes it's difficult for one of the couple to switch gears, to change it up a little bit. And it's not unusual for a long-time married couple that go into polyamory to end up breaking up or changing it up in a way that's significant. People do drift apart in different ways, sometimes emotionally, sometimes sexually, sometimes financially. People who are 20 years old and get married are very different than when they're 40. So it's very normal for people to change. It's very normal for them to drift apart or want slightly different things. And a lot of times when they reach around the age of 40, 45, 50, they start to examine things. What's known as the midlife crisis triggers a lot of people to start re-examining things that they thought they thought they was the only way. Sometimes it leads to positive stuff. Like I said, I myself have divorced about 2 years ago and made very big changes to my life, which I'm very happy about. For some people, it may not be that joyous situation. And statistically speaking, some people who turn to polyamory do end up in a divorce or breakup of some kind. That's the reality of it. I don't think it has to be the way, but sometimes when I do see that happen, it's usually kind of like the opposite. They don't break up because of polyamory. They break up because they have drifted apart and their relationship is nearing its dawn, and the polyamory is just part of it. Like they're looking for ways to deal with the fact that things have changed. And one of the ways they do it is by going into polyamory, either because it's the right thing for them or because they're looking for some way to make a change and not sure what to do. So saying that, that polyamory causes a divorce, sometimes it does. Sometimes it's the opposite, the other way around. The divorce causes polyamory.
Right. One way of looking at it, it's like, well, if the connection, if the marriage, the original relationship was strong enough, it would persevere through the so-called threat of outside influence or something.
Yeah. And
if it is not strong to begin with, then the polyamory will kind of hasten the end or something. I think that's obviously true in a lot of situations, but it's hard to know because you can't experiment with two different lives, right?
Also, there cannot be a perfect balance in that kind of situation. If there's two people who are married and they go into polyamory, it's very rare for both of them to want it the same exact way. Usually one of them is pushing more towards it or even exclusively towards it. And that by itself is a huge gap that needs to be addressed. If one person wants it, the other one doesn't, then the other person would typically be reluctant or maybe even opposed to it in some way, and that could further the gap that there is between them.
Right.
So it's a trigger.
Yeah, and there's a lot of situations like that. And for people out there listening who aren't aware of this, you might think, oh, it's probably mostly men. In my anecdotal experience, it's equal.
It's actually more women than men for my statistics that show that.
Right. A lot of women in monogamous relationships will have always maybe known they were poly on the inside, and upon hearing about it, they're like, oh, I think I have to be this way. Otherwise, I'm going to have to get a divorce, because the urge to be with other people is, and I want to still be with my husband or my wife, and but I have this other side of me, and so it's not by gender. People often assume it's just a bunch of men being leches and this kind of thing.
No, absolutely not. And society is moving towards empowering women and supporting their rights and their agency. Part of the Me Too movement is kind of reflective of that as well. It's part of it. So more women are more assertive about what they want and what they need, about their needs being or not being met. And so statistically speaking, more women are driving and pushing towards polyamory than men.
So I want to get back to the legal stuff. I'm guessing, since you seem like a organized fella who comes from a professional life, that you've considered the legal ramifications. I'm guessing you're like, well, I don't want someone to take my house away. I mean, yeah. I have money in the bank. If someone wanted to sue me, they'd have motivation, I suppose. I don't know if you want to get into it, but like, what kinds of things have you consulted with a lawyer? What kinds of situations are you trying to avoid, and what do you do to avoid it? Well,
of course, I have consulted with a lawyer, and part of the admission or membership to Spoonz requires any guest to sign a release of liability, a waiver, which discusses some of the things that might happen at Spoonz and the results. So I feel that I've done what it takes. I also, of course, have insurance, like everybody else. Everybody who runs a business is required to.
Does it cost more for you to get it?
Absolutely, costs a lot. Yeah.
Did the insurance company go like, wait, so we got to send you to a specialist because we can't figure out what the liability?
They're the same company who insures the CSBC, so they know exactly what I'm talking about. There was no surprises there. They were good. And I am generally not very concerned about the legal ramification. They're important, and I took steps to ensure that the business is protected and so forth. But people who come to Spoonz know exactly what they're getting into. The website is very clear about that. The vetting process that I do, as I mentioned earlier, I talk to every individual and make sure not only that they are safe for us, but also that we are safe for them. So I talk to them to make sure that they know what they're getting into, and that what they're not getting into. I mean, sometimes people call me and they seem to think that Spoonz is a swingers club, or that it runs wild orgies, and of course, that's not the case. So I need to also be clear about that, so they don't end up showing up with wrong expectations. And as far as I know, I have all 5-star reviews on Yelp. I've received a significant amount of praise directly and indirectly. So I think I'm doing things quite right so far.
All your reviews on Yelp are 5 stars?
All of them.
Every single, how many?
I don't remember the number, but all of them are.
But are we talking like stars. 5 or 100 or?
Some of them are visible or invisible, but I believe there's a few dozen at this point.
Because that's pretty shocking. I mean, Yelp, there's always someone.
So far, yeah. I've had a person who was unhappy one time, like a person who had the wrong level of expectation.
Like what happened?
He came in and he was spending some time with a person there, and things were kind of heating up. He was attracted to that other person. He wasn't aware that she wasn't into it.
Oh.
So he was sure that this is inevitably going to lead to some kind of sexual encounter. And when he found out that it wasn't, he left unhappy to that degree. And of course...
Why do you think he had that misperception?
I'm not sure. I guess he felt aroused by being close to that person. And it happens, you probably know this, it happens to men mostly, but not only. that they receive positive attention from a person of the other gender, and they see it as a signal that it's developing into a romantic relationship.
Right.
Of course, it's not always the case, and I make a point of it in part of my briefing to new guests to not misinterpret signals and be respectful and open and keep boundaries. But people sometimes can feel or think this way. In this case, of course, he was unhappy, and therefore I contacted him and talked to him about it and offered a refund for that event, so that at least that I can do. And there's a sort of limit to what I can do. You can't keep everybody happy, but I did my best, and I think I was very fair with him.
How much does it cost?
The events cost between $10 and $20, depends on if it's a weekday or weekend. And there's also some options available for group tickets, monthly tickets. There's several options.
Yeah, I suspect that, because I've seen this before. I mean, on one level, we can't blame some men for at least some of this, in that they're taught that there's one mission in life, and that's to bag the babe, and that if a woman gives you eye contact, then that's them signaling to you. Also, messages that men own women, essentially, and if they want something, then they take it. So there's all these rape culture-y messages, and also just misunderstandings and sexist messages. But also, I think that for some people, regardless of gender, they are narcissistic in a way and have a hard time mentalizing or understanding what's going on in someone else's mind, and they kind of confuse their own thoughts for other people's thoughts, and they will get pretty locked in.
Absolutely.
And then when the other person finally draws a line, the narcissistic person becomes extremely angry, because they're like, well, you led me on, like you were purposefully screwing with me, when in fact the victim was just like, I was just being nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It happens a lot.
Yeah. And so I imagine that personality also comes into play. Yep. Do you try to screen for that? Because that'd be hard to screen for.
It's difficult to screen for it, and there's a certain limitations. I can't, grill. I can do 100. I can't do what's it called, 120 degree, or I can't grill a person on the phone or know everything about them. If they lie to me, they lie to me, and all I can rely on my senses and ethics, and that's why I mentioned sometimes I meet a person in person rather than on phone if I'm not confident that I'm reading them right over the phone. But that's part of life. I do. Beyond the fact that, of course, the website is very clear about what Spoonz is and isn't, and beyond clearing it in the briefing, and on the phone, like I mentioned, we have a briefing that we do to new guests at the beginning of every event. So for half an hour, we talk about rules and concepts and what is, what isn't. We talk about consent. We talk about discretion. And I believe I'm very clear with that. And so in the 5 months, we've had dozens of parties, and we've not had any significant issues like that, other than that person I mentioned. And hopefully that will continue to be the case. I'm very diligent. It's very important to me to create that safe space. Being small, that means I'm also I'm always there in the middle watching what's going on. And if I see any kind of change in tone, any change in the atmosphere, I might intervene. Safety is always our number one priority.
I mean, if the Center for Sex Positive Culture with Alina Gabosh, which from my memory was around for decades,
yes,
managed to survive with them doing a lot more variety of things than what you're doing, then, they must have navigated the legal aspects somehow. Our
community, both of the CSBC and my own people, are very attached to the, you could say, polyamory community. So the majority of them are polyamorous, and also many of them are part of the kink community. And that community, because it does not focus heavily on sex, and many of us are more spiritual or sensual in that sense, so they're less prone to issues that revolve around sex. So that's why I believe the CSPC was so successful. The community just kind of self-regulates, both in terms of balance of male versus female and balance of activity. And the same thing has been evident in Spoon as well. People are very happy and very enjoying that kind of atmosphere without having issues.
Yeah, that makes sense to me, because again, as I was talking about in the introduction, when we look to our primate cousins, there's a lot of touching. Bonobos are pretty sexual. Chimps are, on average, less sexual, but can be. But both species have a lot of touching, a lot of grooming, and just checking in with each other and that kind of thing. And the fact that you say that, it's like, well, we're so free to exhibit what we want and get our needs met, sexually, physically, romantically, intimately, talking, touching, sexual boundaries, very good at communicating about boundaries. And what ends up happening is the community, as you're saying, gravitates more towards, not so much towards sex as one might assume. It's intimacy, it's closeness, it's like a spiritual connection with people, which makes a lot of sense to me that deep down, if we're left to our own devices, we would touch a lot more and maybe even have sex less often on some level.
Maybe. Yeah.
Because for us, mainstream people, maybe one of the only ways we can cuddle and have that spiritual connection is by having sex. And so we're sort of routed into that one aspect of physical intimacy, when if we're just really allowed to be ourselves, 99% of the touching would be non-sexual, because that's our natural state. That's interesting to think about.
I agree, yes. Indeed, sex is intimate to a lot of people, and they gravitate towards it. And maybe, of course, people who are partnered up do have sex on a regular basis. But like I said before, it doesn't have to be this way. There's a lot of other options. I've actually had a guest tell me a few weeks ago that they received more touch in one evening at Spoonz than they have with their boyfriend of 2 years. So, because, even beyond the whole sexual aspects, some people are just less interested in that, and that's normal as well. That happens. Not everybody's the same. So, we give people the option, the opportunity, even if they're not partnered up, even if their partner is not interested, if they don't have the time. I actually have some guests that come and do nothing but sleep throughout the whole event, just because the atmosphere is so comfy and cozy and relaxing.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Most Americans are sleep deprived, I think particularly in Seattle, because of people who work in tech, honestly, and they're expected to work so much that as soon as you got them in a comfortable, warm spot, they would just conk out.
Yeah.
I might too. I'm very quick to nap. So
I've had a group of 4 people who fell asleep during the event. It was last Saturday, I believe, and the party was supposed to be over at 2 a.m., but I just couldn't bring myself to kick them out, so I just let them stay, and they slept until almost 5 a.m.
Oh my God.
And then kind of walked by themselves and left.
What'd you do? You just left, or?
No, I went to sleep too.
Oh, okay.
I mean, yeah, so there's rules. It's supposed to end at 2 a.m., but they were sleeping. They were not doing anything else.
Yeah.
Why kick them out?
That's funny. Another outlet that a lot of people will seek is massage to get touch. I find that it's a socially sanctioned way of getting one's needs met physically in this way that won't necessarily be for any medical reason, but it's like, I need to be touched, and it's a professional person that touches you, and it's socially sanctioned.
Yeah, that's one way to do it.
And obviously sex work as well.
By coincidence, my building actually has 2 massage parlors that are unrelated to Spoonz in any way. But you're absolutely right. Massage is a form of touch, and it's healthy in many other ways. I myself like a foot massage, so I go to those places to get that. It's not about touch, of course. There's health benefits to it. But yes, you're absolutely right.
Do therapists ever recommend Spoonz to their clients?
I have been told by several therapists that they have sent people towards Spoonz. I can't know specifically which ones, of course, for privacy reasons, but I've been told that it's a thing for several of them.
So I want to end with you describing to the listeners what the lived experience is like for you when you are either at Spoonz or wherever, and you don't know the people. You've never, maybe when you first ventured into this or something. I want to have the listeners get into your shoes a little bit.
For me,
what was it like for you?
For me, touch has always, like I mentioned, the military example is something that's always kind of been on my mind. So for me, it's very natural, very easygoing, very simple. I've even had homeless people come to me and ask for a hug. Like they don't know anything. They don't know that I associated with Spoon or anything. They're just gone on the street. A person would walk up to me and say, "Hey, can I have a hug?" And I cannot say no. I mean, I would say I don't want to, but it's my job. I'm kidding, of course, but I do that, and for me, making this happen is my calling, is my life's purpose. Hopefully, one day I'll be able to do it full time. One day, or there will be other venues and clubs that do this kind of thing. For me, walking into Spoonz is the thing that I wait for the whole week or the whole day, whenever depends on timing. It's 6 hours or 4 hours if that's the weekday of pure happiness and bliss. Now, of course, it is more for me as the owner, because things kind of revolve around me in a way.
Meaning it's more blissful for you?
Yes, than the average Joe, I guess.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I would think it'd be less because you have to be organization guy.
There is that aspect. I mean, there is a certain level of stress related to the fact that I have to run the show, and I can't fully immerse myself in a cuddle as I would have maybe preferred. But still, just going in there and knowing that, today, in an hour, is going to be a bunch of people here. We're all going to cuddle. We're going to be together. It's something I wait for the whole day. And it kind of fills my Spoonz, if you will, Spoonz theory about personal energies. Spoonz theory is a way that some people kind of look at mental energy, where a person might have the mental energy to do certain things, care about certain things, and they might lose or deplete some of that energy. So like if you've had a very long day at work with a lot of people demanding you or a lot of stress or pressure, you run low on that energy or run low on Spoonz. And you might sometimes hear or see a person just kind of being out of Spoonz, like I don't have any more Spoonz to give, which kind of is a different way to say that they don't care anymore. They don't have the ability to care anymore. I believe I've never run out of Spoonz myself. One of the reasons being is that there's so many things that fill up my Spoonz collection. And Spoonz itself does exactly that. An hour or two of cuddling and I'm fresh back to factory settings, ready to give and receive and be loved and love others, just like I was just born. So it's really healthy for me. Beyond that, I'm a positive guy. I enjoy social interactions, both at work and with friends outside of the cuddling experience. So a lot of things fill up my Spoonz bank, if you will.
So you're laying there for 2 hours, cuddling with people,
Yep.
The same people on either side of you? You move around? What do you do?
Because I run the show, I do have to move around a lot. So
do other
typically,
people move around?
Yes, people do move around. We even have a chime that chimes every half hour to kind of remind people that time is passing, so that they might get reminded to kind of shift. Myself, I would typically spend 20, 30 minutes with a certain group around me or near me, and then I might get up and get a drink or answer the door or do something else, check my messages, come back and sometimes cuddle with another group. These are all friends of mine. I mean, they're technically speaking, they're customers, but they're much more to me. It's much more personal to me. I greet every person who comes in the door. I greet, usually with a hug, every person who leaves. And I try to spend some time with every person who's at the party or the event. Of course, if they don't want to, they're right. But if they're open to it, and most of them are, I try to spend at least some time with each. So I basically just kind of, like a butterfly, spend 20 minutes there, then move to another group or move to another side of the group to be closer to somebody else. I talk to people all the time, when they come in and discuss things. A lot of people come up with ideas and notions and thoughts of what we could do at Spoonz, ideas. For example, about a week and a half ago, somebody suggested we do D&D events at the place, because a lot of people who are in the community are fans of D&D. So I'm now exploring and looking into doing this hopefully soon. And that's also another part of it. People come with ideas. I kind of like to say
Yeah.
That that it's a community. I will do what my people need. So if people want a petting zoo, I'll go get some goats and make that happen. Obviously, that's
Ooh, you could have cats and dogs intermixed with the humans for the cuddling.
Obviously, the goats is a bit of an exaggeration, but that's my spirit. I really want to give people what they want and what they need. So I'm almost open to almost any kind of idea and suggestion.
Yeah. I'm just imagining, for myself, I'm sort of a fidgeter and a little bit of a hyperactive soul. So if I was laying there, I would imagine that my brain would get bored or something.
It might.
Are the people the sort of people who can truly just zen out and relax like that? Because for 2 hours, that would be, I mean, I guess the only thing I can really relate to it is like a long massage. And I guess I have to calm my brain down enough to handle, 90 minutes of no visual stimulation or where I'm doing anything. But it's still a little different because there's still some variance to like the massage, movements, 5 minutes on this leg, and there's a little bit of variety of the stimulation. So I'm just wondering like what your experiences of that is.
The climate of the place itself is designed to be comfy and relaxing, so that could help or make people more relaxed, and many stay in the same place for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. Most people do move around, and of course, as a guest, you're free to do whatever you want. So you can come in for half an hour and leave. You can come in for 45 minutes, or it's totally up to you. People do move around. It's normal. It's human. So they would move from one group to the other. They might go grab a drink, or sometimes, people who are vapors or smokers sometimes go outside for a little break. Bathroom breaks are also a part of it. 6 hours, right? Mm-hmm. So it's totally flexible. I've seen many people who literally stay in the same place for 6 hours and not move an inch. There's people who move every 10 minutes. There's people who ultimately are just not a fit for Spoonz. I mean, some people walk in, find that it's not their thing, and leave.
Do people talk?
Happens. Yes. Oh, of course. Yeah. Most people who spend time cuddling do it while talking. Oh. So it's a social interaction.
People are talking.
They catch up about the news of the week. They talk about politics and the.
Are there individual conversations, or is like all dozen people talking?
It's usually some kind of group. I mean, again, the idea is that it's a group thing. So it's usually several people talking to each other. If there's a row of 6 people, then the person on one end can't really hear the person on the other end. But it's a conversation that kind of flows around the group back and forth. And
what's she saying? Tell her.
Yeah, that happens a lot. People just repeating and echoing or discussing.
So most of the time there's talking.
Yes, the majority of people do talk and catch up, and some of them don't. Some do. But
okay. Because in my head I thought it just like it's quiet, but that makes more sense to just like
caressing
have
each other
is
a big deal as well. People caress each other when they are near each other. Sometimes when I'm in a group like this, I have 5, 6 people around me. I caress one with each hand, and another sometimes with my thigh or my foot. So it's a great part of a pleasure of the experience of getting a positive affection in that way as well.
Is there a thought to erections happening? I mean, is there at least a conversation that people have? Because if a woman becomes aroused, it's less noticeable. Yes. If a man does, then I'm just wondering if there's self-consciousness or I don't know.
I've not seen anything of issue happen at the place itself. I do know of one individual who was contemplating coming to Spoonz and did not because they were concerned that they might, that the closest might cause them to have an erection, and then that might embarrass them. So of course that's an option. That's a possibility for some people to be uncomfortable in that way. They could wear something to help with that if they were really, really concerned. And because we're almost all of us are sex positive people who are adults and open-minded, I think that if someone were to develop a partial or full erection, it wouldn't really bother anybody else. It might even be seen as a compliment in some ways. Because just feeling attracted doesn't mean that you have to act on it. Doesn't mean that it has to be unusual.
Yeah. Right. It's our association with erections that the negative associations, like, oh, he's going to rape me, or oh, he's going to stalk me, or, oh, now he's going to want to have sex with me, or, oh, now, he has evil, impure thoughts about me right now or something. And it's like, no, not necessarily. It's just an erection. it happens. It's fine.
You know what? I'll admit, I myself have occasionally, when cuddling with people, have felt a certain attraction to one or more, and sometimes even develop an erection. Usually what I do in this situation is I pull back a little bit to not make them feel it. I mean, I don't want to poke them with it or anything, so I just pull back a few inches so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. And I myself, I know it's a normal reaction, and it doesn't mean anything. I don't act on it. I don't do anything. So, it happens. It's life.
Yeah, I mean, massage therapists, similar. They will say that, oh yeah, I had a guy, he had an erection, and I was more concerned about his embarrassment than anything else. Is marijuana a enhancement for some people's experience?
It is forbidden by policy at our place. The main reason, so alcohol and drugs are not allowed either inside the facility, or guests are not allowed to arrive impaired. The main reason, even though I respect and value these substances and even sometimes use some of them myself, they could affect a person's consent or decision-making process. And I don't want anybody cuddling and then making or doing something that they may regret later. So our policy is that you're not allowed to use those substances on the premises. And if somebody comes in and they feel or seem impaired by a significant amount, then I would avoid or prevent them from joining the event.
It seems like a hard thing to monitor. I mean, a lot of people will use weed every day and don't look impaired. So,
well, look, I'm not the police. I don't test them. I can't really complete it. And to be honest, to be fair, if they had half a glass of wine an hour before, it's not really going to impair most people's judgment. So that's not really what we're targeting here. Creating a safe atmosphere. So I tell people what they're allowed or not allowed to do. It's, of course, listed on the website as well. And I talk about it in our briefing. And I look at people as they walk in. I see how they talk. I greet everybody individually. It has not happened so far in the 5 months and the dozens of parties that anybody arrived impaired. But if they had, a hit of a vape pen before and they're slightly affected by it, slightly happier, it is not a huge concern as long as it's reasonable.
So the last question, and this is the second last question I've asked, is there are people listening all over the world. And obviously, if you have a cuddle organization in your area, that would be a venue for you if this is inspiring you out there to get your needs met in that way, or to experiment with it to see if it's for you. A lot of people, though, don't live in communities where that's an option. What can they do?
Some people can travel if they're within a reasonable distance. Of course, I've had people come from Olympia all the way to Seattle for cuddle events. I've seen people come from Wenatchee and from Everett and other distances. If there's none in the community, I would encourage people to create, to make. What I did, I'm a regular guy. Anybody could do it. Anybody could rent a space somewhere, or even if it's their own living room at home or a friend's house, could put together a space and have a cuddle event. So I would hope that anybody who's interested and wants to will just make that happen in their region. I would even gladly give any person who is interested my entire kit or set of documents with operational procedures and information and stuff like that to help them get started, give them all the information they need. The world needs more cuddling, and I'm committed to doing whatever it takes to make that happen.
Where can people contact you?
The Spoonz.org website is where they can find both information about the org itself and the contact form as well for me. It's listed there. I'm also pretty easy to find. I mean, if you type my name, Erez Benari, anywhere, I have quite heavy presence on the internet. Very easy to find.
That's a hard URL to get, Spoonz.org.
Is it?
Was it? It seems like that would have been chosen a long time ago by someone else.
You would have thought that, but no, it was right there waiting for me. So that was kind of like a clue that Spoonz is a good name. Also, it was available on other social media places. So I just grabbed it, and it's been working well for me.
Well, thanks for coming on the podcast, Erez.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to talk to.
Likewise.
I think that even just talking about cuddling somehow gets some sort of need met. For me anyway, it's just like it's a warm kind of feeling just to talk about these kinds of things. That
I would love to have you at Spoonz as my guest anytime you like.
Thanks. Well, people out there, if you want more information, go to spoonz.org and find out more. And there are cuddling events that are less organized or, I don't know, less professionalized that I've heard about, and you might be able to find that in your area, people's living rooms, that kind of thing.
Yes, and our website also links to most or all of these places and events.
Like directories in other cities.
Yes, there's a page called Resources Links that has our organizations. And just to mention, it is Spoonz with a Z. So spoonz.org.
Okay. And if you have comments, leave them below, chime in, let us know what you think. What are your experiences with it? Are you getting your needs met? Do you feel deprived in this way? Is there a barrier to this? Do you have a problem with any of this kind of stuff? Let us know. And if you want to email me directly, you go to our website, psychologyinseattle.com, fill out the Contact Us page. Let us know what you think, and please take care of yourself. Get your cuddling needs met, your touch needs met, because you deserve it. You really, really do.